Welcome back to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Shander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. This show is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. My guest today is Bill Shander, not Sander, Shander, and he is the author of Stakeholder Whispering, Uncovering What People Need Before Doing What They Ask. Sounds pretty nifty for Chief of Staff. Bill spent years of helping people and organizations communicate complex ideas clearly, teaching millions through LinkedIn Learning and workshops around the world. His new book, which I have right here, tackles one of the most common challenges at work: how to truly understand what your stakeholders need before running off to execute. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Beautiful. So first of all, quick backdrop for people. How does one get to be doing what you're doing now?
I always start way back because I fell into my career. It kind of happened to me, so I can't claim like a strategic path to get here. But essentially, I studied journalism in school. Okay. Then I worked one job in journalism for 9 months. I didn't like it. So then I started my company. And my company was doing, in the early days, interactive things, but this was before the webs. There's like
Okay.
interactive CD-ROMs. That's how old I am. But then, along came the web, and I was doing web design and development for many years. But I always had clients who had data, and the data was going to be a key part of their website, like, data, interactive data experiences. And that data visualization and data storytelling became really all I focused on for the last 10 or 12 years, which coincided with me starting to do courses for LinkedIn Learning and the other workshops that I do, et cetera. So, it was a sort of a natural progression to do the data storytelling and visualization thing. But the other thing is that in that entire time period, all 30 years, my clients would always come to me and say, hey, let's do this. And sometimes this was a great idea. And sometimes this was like,
Not
well, I
good.
mean, yeah, it seems like maybe that's something, but let's talk about this more. And the classic example, like in web design, when I was doing that, let's make the button blue. And it's like, okay, why do you need a blue button? Well, it needs to be noticeable and clickable. Okay. So you need a noticeable button. Let's make a noticeable button. And by the way, it might be blue. It might end up there, but let's talk about that. And so the stakeholder whispering thing has been a key part of any success that I've had, because otherwise, yeah, to your point, someone says do something, you jump, you do it. But if it's the wrong thing, then, what good is it?
Yeah. Whenever someone says data visualization, I remember this meeting I was in, room full of people, our CEO's up there, and he's like, I'm trying to tell a story. I'm trying to tell a story. We have these data points. I want a ballet of data to dance across the screen when we give this presentation. I was like, wow, okay, he's seeing something that the team isn't seeing. But it's true. Like you want
Yeah,
a story to come out of that data. So yes,
for sure.
love that. So is the book? So I've read part of this book. I will admit I've not read all of it, but I've read part of it. Um, what had you write this book? Was it people going, Bill, you have so much information, you have so many stories, you need to make a book? Or did you say, hey, I'm going to actually create something focused for a certain audience?
Yeah, it was a hybrid of the two. So because of my platform on LinkedIn, I get approached by publishers all the time saying, hey, you should write a book. You should write a
Mhm.
book. Let's do a data viz book. And I'm like, I don't want to do a data viz book. There are like a million of those. And so I've been approached many times. And this, about a year and a half ago, whenever it was, when Wiley approached me, at that moment, I had just had this idea. And I was like, I don't want to do a data viz book, but this book, like, no one talks about this. No one talks about how to have these conversations. They say, oh, you should ask people questions. Great, but like how? And so it just seemed like, this perfect sort of synchronistic moment where, a book was suggested. I didn't want to do the other books, and this idea had been like swirling around in my head. So yeah, and it's there. I think there's a real need for it.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you for writing it. And as you and I were talking earlier, Stakeholder Whisper sounded like chief of staff so much to me. I was like, "Oh my goodness, a chief of staff needs this in their arsenal." So, one of the
yeah,
chapters that I did read and I loved, I have it marked here. Let me see if I can find it real quick. This is chapter 11, Peeling the Stakeholder Onion. And I'm going
yeah,
to quote your own book back to you if you don't mind here.
sure,
You say, stakeholder whispering requires identifying your stakeholders, but it also is about making sure your stakeholders identify and recognize and prioritize their stakeholders. It's a subtle
yeah.
distinction, but it's critical. They need to understand who they're working for and why. Can Can you
Yeah.
say more about that part, please?
Sure, and I gotta address the first part too, because, yeah, listen, chiefs of staff, like, the closer you get to the top of an organization, right, when you're dealing with the people at the top, the harder it is, and yet the more necessary it is, right? Because, your chief of staff, you're dealing with the senior people, person, whoever, and they know everything, right? They are the head of it all. And so they think, boom, boom, do this, do this, do this. And they're busy, right?
Oh,
Also,
yeah.
they don't have a lot of time to think everything through. And so they rely on you to say, well, okay, that's a good idea, but how about we do blah, 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 and to really do that translation job. So, especially for chiefs of staff. But then, yeah, to the point, the fact is that, your boss asks you to do something. Okay, but is your boss really the key stakeholder for this thing that you're doing?
Mm.
And 9 times out of 10, they're not. So, the example of your chief of staff, so the CEO says, do X, I want a ballet of data across the screen. Sure, let's do that. And by the way, boss, who's going to be watching this ballet? Who's going to be looking at this data and what are they supposed to do with it? Because guess what? That's the key stakeholder. That's whose needs we really have to meet. Yeah, you too. You're the boss. You're important, but you're doing this for them, right? And so that's what it's really all about. And, bosses, some bosses are very good at that. They recognize that they have an audience and a customer and whoever they're doing stuff for. Some bosses forget, whether it's their ego or other reasons. And so, yeah, our job is to really remind them and help them to reorient their focus in that direction.
And you talk about even taking this to kind of the nth degree. So you talk about hierarchy, and everyone has someone they're answering to or reporting to, and you can do that infinitum to, you know, the CEO and the board and the shareholders and the people's, spouses at home, and all the way to this
Yeah.
endless cycle. And while you might not prioritize all of those stakeholder needs, even thinking about it that way and really plotting out, okay, who are my stakeholders here? There's different types of stakeholders, and you talk about that in the chapter, but maybe say a little bit more about the different types of stakeholders, because people hear that word and they're like, oh, end user or my boss, but it
Yeah.
can be those people, but it also can be some other types of people.
That's it. And so, I'll give you an example from a real life project. And I talked a little bit about this project in the book. I'm working on a project, putting together a giant interactive data, a ballet of data actually for this particular audience. And so I was brought in by the marketing and innovation group at this company. So this person was like my client. He brought me in. He is definitely a stakeholder of mine. But clearly the users of this software, this interactive experience were going to be a key
Mm.
stakeholder. But there were other stakeholders, like the media. This was going to be released at this giant conference, and they wanted press coverage within this, industry. That was a key stakeholder, and they weren't like the same as the users. We had to make sure the functionality really reached the users, but the media had to be a little bit enticed and excited about it too. And so, yeah, we're going to prioritize them. The users number one for sure. The marketing team and their
Yeah.
needs were really key at the company, and the media were somewhere right in there. And we had like a dozen other stakeholders, the executive VPs who run this company. They were important because they could put the kibosh on it, but they weren't that important in terms of like meeting their needs. Do you know what I mean? And so that's the constant dance, is to really find, as you said, the hierarchy of stakeholders, really prioritize them in the right way, recognize that some are equally important, but have different
Yep.
needs, sometimes clashing needs, and do the best you can.
And one of the things you call out as a mistake you made early on in your career was not having the exposure or the time with one of the key stakeholders, where you were speaking with, these people, you changed their names, but Dave and Joe. And I was talking
Yeah.
to Dave, and I thought like Dave and Joe were representative of like this key person, and it wasn't. And you found out
No.
I needed to be able to have conversations way upstream. And that was a learning lesson from you. So for chiefs of staff listening, I think that might be relevant as well.
It is. And what's interesting is chiefs of staff are so lucky because you actually have the ear of the top of the food chain. And so you don't have the struggle of
Mm.
whispering by proxy, as I refer to it. You don't have, you're talking to the handlers and you never get to the key person. But on the other hand, of course, you have to remember you have to have empathy because the people who are trying to whisper you to
Yeah.
get to the stakeholder,
Oh, yeah.
you have to sort of play that game in the middle and, be do as good a job, communicating by proxy as you possibly can. I know it's a thing that you do, and yet also recognize that you can't be perfect at it, and to know when to, you know what, I think you should talk to the CEO next week, and I can get you 22 minutes in the calendar, make it good, and maybe help them prepare for it,
Yep.
etc. But yeah, it's such a challenge. Whispering by proxy is nearly impossible, but of course, it's it's uh, it's inevitable, and so we have to do the best we can in that
Yeah.
type of situation.
And I know chiefs of staff listening are gonna go, "Okay, Emily, I get the concept of this, I'm all on board." What happens when my CEO, when my stakeholder, like, does not listen? They're not wanting to listen to this message right now, but
Yeah.
it's key to, like, get this through to them.
Yeah, so I have a chapter in the book where I talk about the trouble you'll run into, and I list out a whole bunch of the characters, the types of people who are more difficult to whisper. Um, and so you can sort of at least identify them. But if you're a chief of staff, your person how whisperable they are. Um, I have another chapter in the book that talks about essentially what to do about that a little bit, but the specific tactics are so contextual
Yeah.
that it's hard to give much specific advice. And so the vague advice is honestly find a new boss. Like if your boss is truly unwhisperable across the board, then, that's probably not a great place to work. It's probably very difficult to be in that role.
Mhm.
Obviously, sometimes, yeah, they just don't have the time. They got too much going on, etc. You do the best you can. And what I, have another chapter in the book is about influence and persuasion, some key techniques to persuade people or really to help them persuade themselves of certain things. And then I also talk a lot about when you do have limited time, or whether you're chief of staff or whether you're, lowest person on the totem pole and you only going to get 5 seconds with the key person if you're lucky. At a minimum, there's always like something you can do. So lowest person on the totem pole or chief of staff or the most busy CEO on earth. Hey, let me ask you one question. And you can ask a question as basic as, tell me more about that ballet of data. And because then you'll get them talking a little bit, and that context can be very helpful. Or maybe you can ask a question, the second level question, which is, how am I going to measure success? Right. And that's a question we all know we're supposed to ask all the time, but it's a good question because it gives us sort of the kinds of things that they're looking for. It gives that context that becomes more specifics that'll help you figure out what they really need. And obviously, if you can have an hour-long conversation or a 3-hour-long conversation, all the better. But you know, take small bites of the apple, even when that person is reticent, to say the least.
Love that, and I always tell people, start with the bottom line. So don't give them, like, the context and the caveat and this and da, 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 like, start with the bottom line and then backtrack into
Yeah,
that if they wanna hear more about that, but
yeah,
CEOs are moving a million miles a minute, got 47 things over here and 27 things over here. You gotta be to the point, snappy with your information. I love
yeah.
the questions though. Kind of, I always, as a coaching question, I say, if we did that, or if you did that, what would you have that you don't have now, or what would be different than it is right
Yeah.
now? And getting them to think of like, oh, okay, hold on. And it kind of goes to your point earlier about the outcomes and what the actual stakeholders will use that for or will do with that end result that you have. So I think getting to some of those questions and getting your stakeholder to think about those questions and answers can be powerful.
It can be really powerful. And, one of the most important techniques that I talk in the book, in fact, the entire book is kind of oriented around this, is that this is all about the Socratic method. It's all about asking questions. And the goal of the Socratic method, which people often don't remember, is you're not asking questions to learn the answer yourself. That'll happen. I mean, you are doing that. But more importantly, you're asking questions so that they learn the answer. So, exactly as you just described, you ask a question so that they can think, and you're literally said, the idea that like, oh wait, yeah, hang on. There's going to be a moment of whoa, 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 huh, and they're going to maybe even look up at the sky because they're going to be truly having an insight, possibly. That's the goal of this whole process: is to get them thinking, get them having an insight, and then they will convince themselves, oh yeah, I don't need a blue button. I don't need a ballet of data. I need this. But you're helping them get there.
And I think the trap that CEOs and chiefs of staff and all of us fall into is we wanna have "the answer," in quotes, like the answer. And sometimes
Yeah.
that's not the most useful thing. Sometimes there isn't the answer, an answer. It's like, we've got a couple options here, they've all got pros and cons, let's talk this through, or let's you know what? I'm stuck in my box. I need creative thinking. So let me ask a powerful question to get us out of this because we're all kind of
Yeah,
stuck in a rut. But I love your call out there on the Socratic method where it's to get them to think. And
that's it.
CEOs, first of all, you got to leave, like, hold space and time for them to just think and then be able to kind of create a safe space. That might not be the right word, but CEOs are like, I'm a CEO because I have to have the answer. I'm the decider. I make a
Right.
decision. Boom, 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 boom. And it's like, hey, sit down, sit back, think about this for a little
Yeah.
bit.
It's true, and it is a safe space because yeah, like, they're not at that moment, they're not in front of the board.
Yeah.
You're the chief of staff. You are like the closest person they have, and if they can't talk to you, boy, they can't talk to anybody, right? And so, yeah, they should be able to actually riff a little bit. But you're 100% correct. Like, yeah, they're used to having the answer. They expect to have the answer, and so it can be an uncomfortable feeling to have these conversations. But I'll tell you what, my favorite projects, my favorite clients, and that project that I mentioned first was one of those. They valued me across the board. They hired me every time because they're like, Bill, we love the way you guide the conversation. Forget about the execution. The conversations at the beginning are the key.
Mm,
And so if you can work with people who value that and they get comfortable and enjoy that process, man, that's where the magic happens.
yeah. What other advice would you give to chiefs of staff who are trying to unpack or peel back the request or the ask from their principal, from their CEO? Like, okay, they've said, like, do this. Let me clarify. Like, how would you guide people through that questioning?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing I can describe is that I have a technique that I call the dance of the 6 W's in the book. And, the 6 W words: who, what, when, where, why, how, right? How's an honorary W word. Um, and the magic of those words isn't just that you can bounce around between tell me who, tell me when, tell me why, tell me who again. Like, and that's good. Like, bouncing around is key. And it's not literally just those words, but the magic of it is that some of those words are divergent words. Why? Why is a divergent question? Because the answer is endless. I could give you a 12-hour essay on why for something, right? It's literally infinite. When is convergent? When? Next Thursday, right? Like, so the beauty, the magic of combining and bouncing back and forth between divergent and convergent questions is twofold. One, divergent is endless creativity. I never have to come to a decision. Convergent answers are decisions. Okay. And especially like for certain people, they're going to be much more comfortable with one or the other. Like creative people are like, oh, let me ideate all day long, and they hate to come to decisions. CEOs are probably the opposite. Don't let me, don't make me, be creative and thinker. Let me get to like the 1,200 decisions I need to make. Long story short, that discomfort, whichever one is more uncomfortable than the other, forces that moment of, ooh, wait, hold on. It helps get them to that insightful opportunity. And in addition to their own discomfort, just the fact of bouncing back and forth between the two styles just gets the brain slightly out of balance, again, leading to more opportunities for that moment of insight.
I never thought of those types of questions like that. But yes, it's kind of this interplay of let's be up in the clouds and be visionary, creative, win.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why, how, like all these things. I love your description of that. What are like the top mistakes you've seen people make when they try to approach stakeholder whispering where it's like, "Ooh, no, that's not how you want to do that."
Yeah. It's a good question. I've made so many mistakes in my career. It's hard for me to prioritize them. For sure, not recognizing who the stakeholders are, and not making sure you have full access to them, like we talked about
Mhm.
before, peeling the onion. Um, I think what you just described, the idea that every feeling like you should already have the answer, or that even worse, that the whole reason I wrote the book, my boss has all the answers. So not even stakeholder whispering in the first place is probably the biggest sin. Your boss says jump, you say how high, you start jumping, right?
Yeah.
And so take a moment and recognize that your boss is not, the all knowing, right? Deity. Like, they don't always know. And so your job, and we're not going to laugh at them. We're not going to make fun of them. We're not going to be resentful or annoyed. It's just human condition. It's okay. So take a moment, get the clarity you need, and then work on that. I think that's probably the most important first thing. But, There's a bunch of things that we do, and the most important thing I would say to remind people of is, you're in your job for a reason. I don't care if you're the chief of staff or if you're like, you're mopping the floors. You're there, you got that job, you know more about mopping floors or whatever it is you do than probably anybody in your organization, or at least you know enough to be in the role that you're in. And your stakeholders, I don't care if they're up here or here or here, you know, they need you to do what you do well. And for you to do what you do well, someone says go mop the floors. Okay, sure. Should I spend extra time in the corners because they're a little dingy, or should I just do it quick because I know there's a meeting in 20 minutes? That's a valid question. And so get the clarity you need to do it right.
Yeah, and one of the things that came up when you were talking is, I remember one of the reasons I was successful with my principal, I had worked with him before, and I kind of saw through him, meaning I wasn't in awe of his title, and I wasn't in awe of
Yeah.
his presence. I respected him for sure. He was exceptional at what he
Yeah.
did, but I saw him as like a flawed person who was crazy, crazy good, like savant-like good at certain things and just fall down disaster bad at others, and he would fully admit this, if he was here.
Yeah.
Uh, and but I feel like many people get in the trap you just described, which is like, jump how high? You must know
Yeah.
everything because you have CEO, after your name. So I'm wondering, do you have any tactical and practical examples of how you would clarify something or push back on something? I know it's context dependent, so you're not gonna be able to cover every scenario, but just pick a scenario you've seen and maybe share just some tactical takeaways if you have them.
Yeah. I mean, so one thing is that, I can use the website design blue button example again. I am the expert in that situation. I'm a designer and I know my job is to solve my client's problems. And I had to understand what the real problem was in order to get to the solution. And so, I use the phrase pushback all the time. So this is not criticizing you, but I have to remind myself also, it's not really about pushing back. It's about getting clarity. And so when I'm really doing stakeholder whispering at my best, I'm asking for clarity and I'm explaining why, but I'm not pushing back on their blue button. I'm saying blue button sounds like a great idea. Tell me more about why you think a blue button is the right answer. What are you trying to accomplish by making it a blue button? So I'm asking questions. That's the other beautiful thing about asking questions is you don't make them defensive. You're helping them bring more light to the issue. Trying to think of another example. Uh, I've worked on a million projects. I have speaking engagements, all the stuff that I do. And actually, I have another example. So, like, I do a lot of training. Companies hire me to train their people on data storytelling and visualization. And a lot of times, it's sort of like I want the ballet of data, as you described. A company will say, "Oh, we need you to come in and teach our people, data visualization, data visualization, data visualization." I say, "Okay, cool, cool. Let's talk about your people. Tell me more about them. Who are they? What do they do? What departments are they in? How much experience do they have with data visualization, et cetera, times 100." And usually by the end, we find out really what they need is less about data visualization, certainly not, working the software. What they really need is storytelling and communication skills.
Mhm.
And so it's not, I never say, I'm sure they don't need data visualization, but it's just getting to, and I may be thinking that in my head, by the way, but it's getting to, I guess asking leading questions. It's a really hard balance. It's open-ended questions. Tell me more about that. And eventually, and to answer the 6 W's for sure, and eventually slightly leading questions. As I start to sense that, okay, I think I might be right. I think maybe it's more about storytelling than data viz. I'll start to lean into that. Do you think maybe we should teach storytelling along with the visualization? Oh yeah, yeah, storytelling for sure. And then, maybe we shouldn't teach software at all. Really, maybe it's more about the big ideas. What do you think? So, but I save that stuff to the end.
Mm.
If you ask the leading questions at the beginning, now your bias is introduced. You're no better than the CEO who thought they had the brilliant idea. You're going to push your brilliant idea, and now it's like a conflict. Guide them, get them thinking a certain way, and then at the end, you can be a little bit more leading in order to make sure, and you're still clarifying. It sounds like maybe storytelling. You're still clarifying, but even though you're sort of leading the witness a little bit.
Yeah. No, I like that, and it's their idea. They answered the question like, "Oh my gosh, that's a brilliant idea. We should do more storytelling." Um,
Yeah,
how do you so we talked about CEO's time being limited, or any stakeholder might be like, "You gotta be, like, on the point on point." If
yeah,
you have all these questions that gain clarity and you kind of be leading at the end, What if you don't have that time to ask all those questions? What do you do?
Yeah. It's so hard. I would say that, you prepare your as best you can before the meeting. And obviously you're going to be given hopefully a time frame for the meeting. So you have to have an
Sure.
hour or 12 minutes. Um, and even if I know I've given 12 minutes, I'm going to prepare a 30-minute conversation, but put the stuff that I may not get to at the bottom. And I just make sure those first two or three or four questions get to the absolute heart of the matter, as like you said, get to the good stuff first. Um, Now, that being said, it is hard to build as I described it when that's the situation. Yeah, sometimes you just can't do it that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if I'm given, like, listen, CEO says do X, and I know that X plus Y divided by Z is probably the better approach, I may go in there and say, listen, X sounds like a great idea. I was thinking if we added Y and divided by Z, I think that, and here are the three reasons why I think that might be a good idea. What's your reaction to that? Do you think I'm crazy or did blah, blah, blah? So sometimes you got to lead the witness a little earlier. And again, that's the beauty of the chief of staff position, is that they know you and trust you. You go in the room, you have their respect, and you can get away with a little bit more with leading the witness than the rest of us, right? But even so, go in there with the tone of getting clarity. Because even in that dynamic of chief of staff and the CEO, I'm sure you all know, everybody listening, that, sometimes, that trust can be faltered, or sometimes they recognize your flaws and your biases, et cetera. So the more it can feel like you're asking for their brilliant input and their clarity, then you'll never have that defensive moment, even though you have a better relationship than most.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're hitting on it. We've talked about this, but clarity. It's not confrontation. It's just we're getting clear. Like I'm trying to
Yeah.
help me understand. I just want to understand better, so I'm clear, type of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, chiefs of staff, obviously, their principal is their main stakeholder, but they have many others, and so you might not have the same dynamics in the relationship. You might not have the time, and so I think it does depend, and it is context dependent, and sometimes it's give them like, the good stuff, but make it so, like, you want more of this. Make them ask for more. Like, "Hold on, like, can we get something else on calendars to follow up on that?" Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, for sure, if you have these great conversations, and even when especially if you do an awesome job with a 5-minute meeting, yeah, they're going to gain more trust and more trust and more trust, and before you know it, everything they do, they're going to give you an hour because they know you're bringing so much value to the
Yeah,
conversation.
and you can still kinda lead the witness, and it's not manipulative. I mean, it is, but in a good way, where you could
Yeah,
even say at the end, like, "And I can prepare like this, and this to show you for next time. Would that be helpful?" Absolutely. It's like, "So
yeah,
and so, get that on calendar." So you can kind of
yeah,
position this and play this in lots of different ways.
definitely.
Yeah, gotcha. So you mentioned it before, but chiefs of staff also have people whispering to them, trying to whisper in their ear, trying to get information out of them, trying to jockey for position. If you just told them this would be so much better, trying to get in the room with the CEO. On the flip side, how would you receive whispers, if that's the right way to say it?
Yeah. So yeah, sometimes you can't give them access, right? You just can't do it. There's no time for whatever reason. Then you need to be you're the person they're whispering by proxy, and you do the best you can to give them the information you have. You know, it's kind of a simple answer, and that sometimes no is no, right? Sometimes you just can't give them what they want, and you just do the best you can to give them what you can. Um, I suppose you can always advise them. If the reason you're not giving them access is because they're too disorganized, they don't know what they're doing,
Mhm.
they're bad at whispering, etc., then you can always advise them. Here are the three things I would need you to do in order to give you time with so and so. But that's probably like your day to day. Like, I don't think I'm probably not adding much value with that answer.
No, I mean, I think it's important though, 'cause, uh, the chief of staff role is so dynamic, and the chief of staff is powerful in a different way than a CEO, I would say, but they're so influential in their own right,
Yeah,
and so being able to hold that and carry that weight, well, I think is part of your job. And by the way, this is just kind of a personal thing, but the beginning of this one chapter, I kind of mentioned the hierarchy, but you said, "There is no end to the hierarchy of power. Everyone answers to someone in some capacity." And it just struck me that our culture and in the business world, hierarchy is like ingrained in us from, little
yeah,
kids, just like school and listen to the teacher and kind of in org charts and certainly in the military or all these different contexts. And I'm wondering how
Yeah.
you just think about hierarchy or power dynamics, or just like, I'm here to help you. I'm here to get clear. Sure, you might be the ultimate decision maker in this particular instance, but you don't know all the answers. I'm the expert in this area. How do you kind of what do you make of all that?
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's true. I mean, hierarchy is an infinite circle. There is no end to it. Everybody answers to somebody. And like, okay, so you go all the way up the chain. The CEO may be making the decision, but yeah, the CEO has been arguing with his wife for the last 3 weeks. And so, is that influencing things? And this might be a scheduling thing and he has to consult with his wife in order to blah, 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 blah. Like there's always something. Now that she may not be your stakeholder for this context, but in a way she might be. Like there might be some dynamics there. Um, and then yes, like I know when I'm speaking with my clients, and I'm in an interesting position because I am brought in as an expert when I'm brought in to teach people data storytelling or to do project work or whatever. So I have that glow of expertise around me. Lucky me, because people really listen to experts. But even if you're not an expert, the fact is you can leverage other people's expertise. So if you're being brought in to work on a project on something, your boss, obviously is hierarchically above you. But boy, if you bring in research in your pocket and saying, "Well, here's the reason why we need to do it this way, this way, this way, because, this Harvard professor said so," then suddenly they're listening to the Harvard professor, but it's coming out of your mouth. And now, like the hierarchy, it's not like it's completely flipped at all, but you have a seat at the table for a reason. So yeah, hierarchy is not linear. You're down here, they're up there. It's far more dynamic. It's far more interesting. And that's where, the art of, these conversations, asking good questions, getting clarity, and also a little bit of persuasion can really be very important just to help these conversations be as productive as possible.
Influence and persuasion, these are like the arsenal or the bread and butter for chief of staff, because I have so many chiefs of staff come to me like, "Emily, how can I do this?" Like, I'm like, "What do you mean? Like, the chief of staff?" "But yeah, but like, I don't have any
Yeah.
direct reports," and I'm like, "Don't have any direct authority." And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, a chief of staff will have more influence than they think. So in the same way
That's
that the
true.
title CEO will precede someone, it's like, it's the CEO coming into the room. That title precedes them. Same with chief of staff is coming in. But if you shrink back, then you diminish your own influence and powers of persuasion. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just really interested. This is just like a personal question of like, I've been in spots where I'm like, I feel so small in this room. Like I am nobody. No
Yeah.
one look at me. I'm just here to listen and learn. But I have a lot of value to bring to the table.
Well, it's so funny. It's like perception is everything, right? Their perception of it and your perception of it. Yeah. Am I an assistant or am I chief of staff? Right? Am I someone who's like running the whole show in a way, pretty much? Or am I just sort of helping out here and there? And
Mm.
just, yeah, the title and the way we just think about that role. And then, yes, also how your colleagues actually perceive that has a huge, huge impact. There's no question.
Yes. There's so much more that we could get into, and maybe we'll do a round 2, Bill. But
Okay.
if people wanna pick up this book, which I would highly recommend, hold it up here one more time, where can they find this? And if they're like, "Oh, I need to talk to Bill about storytelling or data visualization or something else," where is the best spot for people to find you?
Yeah, you can always find me on my website, billshander.com. I'm also, of course, on LinkedIn, and the book is on what's the phrase? Everywhere where books are sold,
Yes.
right? So it's on Amazon, of course, and everywhere else online. And I don't know where it is in stores per se, physical stores, but Google it, you'll find it, or just look on my website, and there's a link to it there.
We will have all those links in the show notes. But Bill, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emily.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.